Good day. We are the Group G, and today we will be tackling the Enlightenment period. And now, Mary Joy would give us the details regarding its background.
The Enlightenment period was the turning point in Philippine literature. We should also acknowledge that before the period, literary works focus on religion and work that support Spanish colonial rule. Then, this is where the Ilustrados play a huge part, as during their stay abroad, they become enlightened about the true democracy of people wherein Filipinos actually are not experiencing. This is where they became enlightened, that the abuses and out of freedom of the Filipino people is actually not normal. Therefore, it leads to collective consciousness led by the Ilustrados, included members of the propaganda movement and later revolutionary leaders, and serves as the link between European ideas and local Filipino society. Just like what I said earlier, as Ilustrados managed to experience life outside, unlike any other Filipinos, core ideals and influences from European like liberalism came in. As Spaniards also contributed to this by opening trade, travel, and education, Filipinos became more enlightened. After that, it influenced by European values such as reason, freedom, equality, and liberalism, spread through schools, books, newspapers, and personal communication. Enlightenment period is the most notable turning point of our history, but we should consider that there are many events that made this turning point period possible, like the execution of the three priests, which is Gomez, Burgos, and Zamora, that we also known as Gumburza. And some of the other contributing factors are world trade expansion, educational reform, and foreign ideas. As this period is filled with twists, one of its turning point once again is the effect of literary works, which became the change of goals, as the early efforts targeted peaceful reform through their propaganda movements, but later on it shifted to the revolutionary goals, then lead to the founding of Katipunan as literature evolves from the appeals to inspiring calls of independence. The outcome of the period awakened political and social consciousness, knowing that it creates the foundation for Filipino nationhood and continuously inspiring future generations to value freedom and justice at any cost. So I conclude the Enlightenment period was the bridge between the centuries of silence and the beginning of the nation that know its worth, stand for justice, and values freedom. That's all.
Instead of simply accepting colonial authority, writers began asking difficult questions, such as why were Filipinos treated as inferior, or why were abuses committed by some colonial officials and friars are tolerated. And now, let us discuss the two major literary forms produced during this period. Number one is the propaganda literature. And today, the word propaganda sometimes has a negative meaning because it is associated with misinformation. However, during the 19th century, propaganda simply meant spreading political ideas and advocating reforms. And the propaganda movement believed that education, logic, and peaceful persuasion could transform society. So instead of encouraging violence among the reformists, they relied on essays, newspapers, novels to convince both Spain and the Filipino that reforms were necessary. So examples works are La Solidaridad, political essays by Rizal del Pilar and Lopez Jaena. And one reason this works because influential is because readers recognize themselves in the story. Readers relate to what actually happened, and it reflects what totally happened during the Spaniards' colonization. Although, so one example is the No Limitang Here. Although it is fictional, but its corruption, abuse of power, or social discrimination reflected real condition under Spanish rule. And in fact, the No Limitang Here is Latin for touch me not, and Rizal used this biblical phrase to symbolize the social cancer that society refused to confront. And the second one is we have revolutionary literature. When reform seemed impossible, another literary form emerged, which is revolutionary literature. So, unlike propaganda literature, revolutionary writings openly encourage resistance against Spanish colonial rule. Example of these are The Kalayaan, which is the official newspaper of the Katipunan, and Kartilya ng Katipunan, Pag-ibig sa Tinubuang Lupa, and Mi Ultimong Adios. Now let us examine the major literary types that became popular during the Enlightenment period. The first one, we have the political essays and editorial political essays, which criticize colonial abuses through reason, evidence, and logical arguments. One example is Sobre la Indolencia de los Filipinos. Here, Rizal challenged the Spanish belief that Filipinos were naturally lazy. Instead, he argued that colonial oppression, forced labor, unfair taxation, and poor opportunities discourage productivity. This is important because Rizal did not simply complain. He analyzed the root causes of the problem. And another one is Filipinas dentro de 100 años. In this essay, Rizal predicted what would happen if Spain continued ignoring Filipino demands. And many historians believe that several of his predictions eventually became reality. The second one is novels. Novels became one of the most influential literary forms because they reach readers emotionally. Rather than presenting facts like essays, novels allow readers to experience injustice through characters and stories. One example nga dito is No Limitang Here, El Filibusterismo, Ninay. And Ninay was written by Pedro Paterno, which is recognized as the first Filipino novel. Third, we have satirical literature. Satire uses humor, irony, exaggeration, and sarcasm to criticize society. So instead of directly attacking Spanish authorities, writers mock their behavior. Example of this includes Dasalan at Tuksolan ni Marcelo H. del Pilar. Also ang Fray Butod. Satire is effective because people often remember humor better than direct criticism. Even today, if we compare, political cartoons, comedy shows, and internet memes continue this literary tradition by exposing corruption through humor. Another is the pamphlets. Pamphlets were short printed publications that were inexpensive, easy to distribute, and widely read. They contain persuasive essays, political arguments, reformist writings, and open letters promoting equal rights, education, and freedom. Examples are Filipinas dentro de 100 años, Sobre la Indolencia de los Filipinos, La Soberania Manakal en Filipinos, Kaigat Kayo. Because pamphlets were cheaper than books, reformist ideas spread much faster among educated Filipinos. And if we compare them to today's world, pamphlets function much like opinion articles, blogs, or viral social media posts. And also this includes poetry. Another one is the poetry. During this period, expressed patriotism, nationalism, sacrifice, and love for one's country. Example of this includes Mi Ultimo Adios ni Jose Rizal and Pag-ibig sa Tinubuang Lupa, Katapusang Hibik ng Pilipinas, Ala Juventud Filipina. Essays appealed to reason but poetry appealed to emotion. Together, they strengthened Filipino nationalism. For example, the Mi Ultimo Adios was written by Jose Rizal only hours before his execution. And the last one is the newspapers and periodicals. They became the primary platforms for spreading reformist ideas. Examples is yung La Solidaridad, Diaryong Tagalog, Kalayaan, and before television, radio, or internet existed, newspapers were the fastest way to share information. And more importantly, they helped Filipinos living in different provinces and even abroad feel connected through a common national identity. So to conclude, the Enlightenment period transformed Philippine literature into a powerful force for social change, and what began as a movement for peaceful reform eventually inspired the struggle for national independence. And through essays, novels, satire, poetry, pamphlets, and newspapers, Filipino writers educated the public and challenged colonial oppression and awakened nationalism.
Of course, one of the most prominent works of Rizal that awakened Filipino spirit, number one, is No Le Tangere. Published in 1887, this novel revealed the corruption and the abuses by Spanish friars and the colonial government. Considering that it has this core theme centered on colonial oppression, the weaponization of religion, the necessity of education for social reform, and the awakening of Filipino national consciousness. Then the sequel, which is El Filibusterismo, which was published in Gent in 1891, prioritizes radical political awakening over social criticism. These works actually intended just for a call for reform, but when the Filipinos became enlightened to it, it is when the purpose of it was unintentionally contorted. And especially La Solidaridad, newspaper that plays a huge role on informing Filipinos and laying important essays criticizing fire abuses and advocating for reforms, making this as a crucial voice for the whole movement. Then Mi Ultimo Adios, this moving poem written by Rizal while he was imprisoned at Fort Santiago is considered the best work of Philippine nationalist literature because it fueled the Philippine Revolution by acting as an emotional rallying cry, solidifying Filipino nationalism and shifting international opinion.
So, let's proceed naman dito sa mga famous authors and writers who define the stage. And then, yung mga writers dito is ginamit nila yung works nila to expose abuses and build national pride. Unang-una na dito, si Jose Rizal, visionary leader, and then meron siyang dalawang novel na nagawa, which is No Le Tangere and El Filibusterismo. So, ang una dito is No Le Tangere. In English translation, Touch Me Not. Published din yung No Le Tangere ng 1887. This novel exposed the corruption and abuses of Spanish friars and the colonial government. It opened Filipinos' eyes to the injustices around them and sparked the first flames of our national consciousness. And yung pangalawa naman, El Filibusterismo, sequel of No Le Tangere. In English translation, it is The Reign of Greed, released in Gent in 1891. It goes beyond social criticism. It calls for bold political changes and laid the ideas that would later lead to armed revolution. Both novels were written by Jose Rizal, the visionary leader of the propaganda movement. Through these stories, he fearlessly laid bare the wrongs done by the Spanish clergy and officials. And last is yung huling famous works ni Jose Rizal, titled Mi Ultimo Adios, in English translation, My Last Farewell. This deeply moving poem was written by Rizal, of course, while he was imprisoned at Fort Santiago. It is widely considered the greatest masterpiece of Philippine nationalist literature. And yung pangalawa naman, si Marcelo H. Del Pilar, journalist and editor of La Solidaridad, wrote Kaingat Kayo and Dasalan at Toksohan to criticize abuses. And yung pangatlo naman, si Cristiano Lopez Haina, founder of La Solidaridad, author of Ang Fray Botod and La Ia del Fraile, exposing the greed of friars during the Spanish colonization. And yung pang-apat naman is si Antonio Luna, intellectual and writer works like Noche Buena and La Tertulia Filipina portrayed Filipino life and society. And yung panglima naman si Emilio Jacinto, Brains of the Katipunan, edited Kalayaan, wrote The Kartilya ng Katipunan, and Liwanag at Dilim to Guide Revolutionaries. Yung pang-anim naman is si Apolinario Mabini, Sublime Paralytic Brain of the Revolution, wrote El Verdadero Decalogo and other works on morality, governance, and nationhood. At ang pang-pito naman is si Jose Palma, poet and revolutionary, wrote the lyrics of the Philippine National Anthem and fought against American rule. Yung pangwalo naman si Pedro Paterno, diplomat and writer-authored Ninay, considered the first Filipino novel. Ang pangsyam naman si Mariano Ponce, propagandist and researcher, used pen names Tikbalang and Naning to write about history and heroes. Yung pangsampo si Andres Bonifacio, father of the Katipunan, founded the KKK after Rizal's exile, wrote ang dapat mabatid ng mga Tagalog, ang katungkulang gagawin ng mga anak ng bayan to inspire the unity and duty.
So, let's begin with the beginning of the period of enlightenment. The period of enlightenment in the Philippines began in 1872 following the execution of the 3 Filipino priests known as Gumburza. Their execution deeply affected many Filipinos, especially educated individuals who realized the injustices of the Spanish colonial rule. This tragic event inspired Filipino intellectuals and reformists to speak out through their writings instead of remaining silent. During this period, literature took a new purpose. Rather than focusing mainly on religion or entertainment, writers used essays, novels, poems, and newspapers to expose abuses, call for reforms, and encourage Filipinos to think critically about their situation. Their work aimed to educate people about their rights and inspired them to seek equality, justice, and better treatment under the Spanish government. The martyrdom of the Gumburza became a symbol of sacrifice and resistance. It awakened a strong sense of nationalism among Filipinos and motivated many writers to use literature as a powerful tool for social and political change. Because of this, the period of enlightenment marked the beginning of literature that encouraged national consciousness and laid the foundation for the country's struggle for independence. Next is when it shifted from religious to nationalist literature. During the period of enlightenment, Philippine literature underwent a major transformation. Before this period, most literary works were religious in nature because they were heavily influenced and controlled by the Spanish colonial government and the Catholic Church. These writings mainly taught Christian beliefs, promoted obedience, and supported the existing colonial system. However, as more Filipinos became educated and became aware of the injustices under Spanish rule, writers began using literature for a different purpose. Instead of focusing only on religion, they wrote essays, novels, poems, and newspapers articles that criticized colonial abuses, exposed corruption, and called for reforms. Their goal was to make Filipinos aware of the problems in the society and encourage them to work toward positive change. And as a result, the themes of literature also changed. Writers emphasized freedom, justice, equality, and Filipino identity, helping people develop a stronger sense of patriotism and national pride. Literature became more than just a source of religious instruction. It became a powerful tool for awakening national consciousness and inspiring Filipinos to seek reform and eventually independence. Next is the rise of the propaganda movement. The propaganda movement emerged from 1872 to 1896 as a peaceful campaign for reforms in the Philippines. Filipino reformists, both in Spain and in the Philippines, believed that the problem in the colony could be solved through reason, education, and persuasive writing rather than through violence. Because of this, they used newspapers, essays, and novels, and even pamphlets and other literary works to express their ideas and call for change. Uh, Through their writings, they demanded equal rights for Filipinos and presented in the Spain government uh, freedom of speech, secularization of parishes, and an end to abuses by the colonial officials and friars. They hope that exposing injustices and appealing to fairness, the Spanish government would grant reforms and improve conditions in the Philippines. Literature and journalism became the main weapons of the propaganda movement. Newspapers such as La Solidaridad helped spread nationalist ideas and unite educated Filipinos. Writers used their works not only to criticize colonial rule but also to awaken national consciousness and patriotism among the people. Uh, in short, the propaganda movement showed how literature could become a powerful tool for political reform and the growth of Filipino nationalism, preparing the way for the country's later struggle for independence. Uh, lit- Next is literature as tool for reform. During the period of enlightenment, literature became more than a form of entertainment. It became a powerful tool for reform. Filipino writers in both the Philippines and Europe used essays, poems, novels, and newspapers and other literary works to expose the injustices and abuses committed under the Spanish colonial rule. Instead of remaining silent, these writers used their works to educate Filipinos about the realities of colonial oppression. They wrote about issues such as corruption, discrimination, abuse of power, and the unfair treatment of the Filipino by Spanish officials and the friars. By revealing these problems, uh, they encourage people to think critically about their situation and recognize the need for change. The writers did not initially seek independence through violence. Rather, they hoped that their writings would persuade the Spanish government to implement
peaceful reforms such as granting equal rights, fair representation, and better treatment for the Filipinos. At the same time, their works awakened a stronger sense of national consciousness, inspiring Filipinos to unite and take pride in their identity. As a result uh, literature became an important force in strengthening the reform movement. Uh, it informed the public, inspired patriotism, and laid the intellectual's foundation for the country's eventual struggle for independence. And lastly, the transition to revolutionary literature. The transition to revolutionary literature took place between 1896 and 1898, when many Filipinos realized that peaceful appeals for reform had not brought significant changes under the Spanish colonial rule. After years of writing essays, novels, and newspaper articles that called for equal rights and reforms, many reformists concluded that Spain was unwilling to grant the changes they had requested. And because of this, the focus of literature changed. Instead of asking for reforms, Filipino revolutionaries and patriotic writers began calling for complete independence from the Spain. Uh, their writings became more passionate and direct, encouraging Filipinos to stand together, resist colonial oppression, and fight for the freedom of their country. The themes of literature also shifted. Uh, Writers emphasized patriotism, courage, sacrifice, unity, and national independence. Their works inspired Filipinos to support the revolution and strengthened the belief that Filipinos were capable of governing themselves. In short, revolutionary literature uh, reflected the growing determination of Filipinos to achieve freedom. It became a source of inspiration and motivation, helping unite the Filipino behind the goal of an independent nation.
Overall, the Enlightenment period represents a crucial turning point in the history of Philippine literature because it redefined the role of the written word. Literature evolved from supporting colonial and religious institutions into becoming a powerful medium for intellectual awakening, reform, and the expression of Filipino identity. And that is all. Thank you for watching.